If you're fascinated by the darker sides of humanity, join us every week on our podcast, Serial Killers, where we go deep into notorious true crime cases. With significant research and careful analysis, we examine the psyche of a killer, their motives and targets, and law enforcement's pursuit to stop their spree. Follow Serial Killers wherever you get your podcasts and get new episodes every Monday.
You know that saying, champagne problems? Like an actor I used to be friends with who once complained to me that he booked a TV series and a Martin Scorsese film and had to choose between them. That's a champagne problem. It can be hard to take champagne problems seriously or find room in our hearts to really care, but as the notorious B.I.G. warned us, mo money, mo problems. And even too much champagne can be lethal. Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. I am someone with an unhealthy disdain for the very wealthy, it's true. But when I say eat the rich, I don't actually wish physical harm to people with money. I just want their wealth redistributed. Though I may end up a member of the angry mob with pitchforks and such, I'll also be like, maybe not the guillotine, maybe they can just do some actual community service for the rest of their lives. Besides, at the end of the day, the rich may just end up eating each other. At around 11 a.m. on December 15, 2017, realtor Elise Stern was showing a palatial home in the Tony neighborhood of North York, Toronto. The house at 50 Old Colony Road, listed for sale at just under $7 million, was owned by Barry Sherman, Canada's 18th richest person, and his wife, Honey. The couple were selling the house with plans to build an even more expensive home, estimated to cost somewhere between $30 and $40 million, closer to their daughter Alexandra and her new baby. Stern guided the prospective buyers through the 6-bedroom house. After viewing the above-ground floors, Stern brought the couple downstairs to see the basement, attached 4-car garage, and pool. Just inside the basement by the door leading from the garage, Stern found the home inspection papers Barry told her he'd be bringing home on the 13th. Barry's gloves lay on top of the papers. Thinking nothing of it, Stern picked up the papers and put them on a nearby ledge. She then entered the darkened pool area and almost immediately turned around and calmly guided the prospective buyers out of the house entirely. I don't know what excuse she gave for abruptly cutting the tour short. Perhaps there's a day in realtor school where you learn what to do when you come upon a potential double murder in the house you're showing. Upstairs, Stern told the housekeeper and another member of the house's staff that she'd seen Barry and Honey sitting by the pool. She said she thought maybe they were meditating, but then realized very quickly that something was definitely not right. I would venture to guess it would have been highly unusual for the Shermans to be meditating in the pool area, which was almost never used, and therefore not even cleaned that often, especially not while their realtor was showing the house. The staff member went down to see what was going on and discovered the Shermans were definitely not meditating. They were, in fact, dead. The police were called, and the housekeeper just went on cleaning the house like she hadn't just been told her employers were dead downstairs. Police arrived on the scene at 11:45 a.m., at which point they confirmed the terrible news and asked the maid to stop cleaning what was, at that point, very obviously a crime scene. The Shermans' bodies were next to the pool, both attached to the handrail by belts around their necks. Their arms were pinned back by their jackets, which had been pulled down past their shoulders. Barry was sitting up with his legs crossed at the ankle. Honey's body had slumped over. Police began the grim task of notifying next of kin and piecing together a timeline. From what they could glean from the crime scene, Honey was likely attacked first. She arrived home around 8 p.m. on the evening of the 13th. Her cell phone was found in a powder room near the home's front door. Those familiar with the Shermans said Honey didn't normally use this powder room, so police guessed whoever attacked her did so as soon as she came in the front door of the house. She likely ran to the powder room to hide and call for help, a call that never happened. It looked like she'd been hit in the face and subdued before being dragged down to the staging area at the pool. Barry sent an email from work about 20 minutes after Honey was believed to have gotten home. Arriving home around 9 p.m., about an hour after Honey, Barry parked in the garage and entered through the garage door to the basement, where he was likely ambushed. The cause of death for both Shermans was strangulation, and police assumed the belts around the Shermans' necks had been the ones used to strangle them. The housekeeper told police the home's alarm was off when she arrived on the morning of the 15th. It was unusual, but she didn't think too much of it. A patio door on the basement level was unlocked, and a window in the basement had been left open to let fresh paint air out and dry. There were no signs of forced entry. Police first theorized that the killer came in through the basement window or the patio door, deactivated the alarm, and eventually left through the patio door. Whoever had killed the Shermans, they thought, clearly knew the layout of the home. Also, the last anyone had seen or heard of either Barry or Honey was on the 13th, a full 36 hours before the realtor found them dead by the pool. For a household with a staff, 36 hours is an awful long time for the bosses to be incommunicado. There are the people who look after the house itself, and then the people who look after the people, the personal assistants, trainers, business employees, etc., not to mention family members who were used to pretty frequent texts and calls. We've all heard about, or unfortunately known, someone who died and no one discovered them for a few days. But those are usually not billionaires with children, companies, and a whole household staff. How on earth did it take a day and a half for anyone to notice that Barry and Honey Sherman were missing? And who on earth had killed them? Hey strangers, did you know I have 2 other podcasts? It's true, and they couldn't be more different from Strange and Unexplained. Dear Daisy, a podcast about secrets, is a bi-weekly show where I read listener letters and give advice. And Shut the F Up, Nick Lachey is my Love is Blind recap podcast with the amazingly talented Ellen Marsh. Right now we're covering Love is Blind UK. Come for the recaps, stay for the terrible accents. New episodes of both shows are exclusively on Patreon at Grab Bag Collab. Visit patreon.com/grabbagcollab to listen to my other 2 podcasts along with so much more content, all for just $5. Barry and Honey Sherman were well-liked and had a pretty huge network of people around them. The couple gave generously to various charities and were considered philanthropists. Upon learning of their deaths, Senator Linda Frum said, quote, 2 weeks ago it gave me immense joy to present a Senate medal to one of the kindest and most beloved members of Canada's Jewish community. Today I am gutted by the loss of Honey and Barry Sherman. Our community is steeped in grief. I am heartbroken." End quote. Brad Dougwood, another member of the Canadian government, tweeted, quote, "Deeply shocked and saddened to hear of the deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman, philanthropists and entrepreneurs who made our province a better place to live." End quote. The president of Toronto University, the Shermans' alma mater, wrote in an official statement from the university, quote, "Their far-reaching philanthropy supported many important institutions and causes. At U of T, Barry and Honey were incredibly generous supporters of our Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy, and Barry was highly engaged as a member of our Entrepreneurship Leadership Council. Clearly, few individuals have done more to advance the health and well-being of Canadians than Barry and Honey Sherman." End quote. Even Toronto Mayor Jonathan Troy, who knew the Shermans personally, speaking at their memorial, said, Honey was, quote, filled with an almost supernatural sense of joy and fun and passion. For every bit of Barry's reserve, at least in public, she had a special kind of energy that more than made up for that. She was on everybody's go-to list because she was lovable and fun, but also because she got the job done. What a joy to know her. To know her was to love her, end quote. And Barry and Honey's children made their love and affection for their parents known in the weeks and months following their tragic deaths. At their memorial service, attended by a venerable who's who of Canadian politics, including the Prime Minister himself, Justin Trudeau, Jonathan said of his parents, quote, they were funny people, and they loved sharing their enthusiasm for life. Any event, be it a bar mitzvah or wedding or just a simple Passover dinner, was an occasion to celebrate with gusto. Our parents loved life so much. They loved to celebrate, end quote. Praise for the Shermans was not hard to come by, certainly. But you don't get to be the 18th richest person in Canada with an estimated wealth of somewhere between $4 and $10 billion without making a few enemies. Turns out, the Shermans had their fair share. Barry was ambitious from a young age. He worked summers during school, including once for NASA. He graduated from MIT in 1965 and claimed to have had a 5.0 GPA. Lord knows I could just as easily say I graduated with a 5.0, so we'll just have to take him on his word. Regardless, it's clear Barry was very smart and driven. Before MIT, he went to work for his uncle Louis Winter, making deliveries for his pharmaceutical company. When his uncle and aunt both died in 1965 within a couple weeks of each other, Barry made a bid to buy the company. The bid was unsuccessful for some reason, but 2 years later he regrouped, got an investor, and made a more serious bid of nearly $500,000 for the company. Part of the purchase included the promise to employ Lou's 4 sons once they turned 21, and to give them the option to buy up to 5% stock in the company. However, Barry sold the company for around $2 million 5 years later, in 1972, and used the proceeds to found a new pharmaceutical company, Apotex. Fast forward all the way to 2011, when the Winter sons were now very much adults and filed a suit against Barry, arguing that Apotex was made possible by the proceeds of their late father's company. Kerry Winter, one of the 4 sons, told the Toronto Star in 2017 that a major reason why the company was sold to Barry in the first place was to help keep it in the family and ensure a kind of safety net for the boys. The lawsuit dragged on for years, with the plaintiffs at one point trying to include Honey and the Sherman children in their complaint. The court disagreed, however, and ruled in favor of the Shermans, with the judge commenting that the Winters case was, quote, wishful thinking and beyond fanciful, end quote. In fact, a week before the murders, the Winter brothers were ordered to pay $300,000 of Barry's legal fees. Talk about adding insult to injury. Ouch. Apparently, though, Barry had indeed continued to financially support his cousins to the tune of millions of dollars, even without the agreement that he employ them or let them buy stock in their father's company. According to a piece from the National Post from 2017, quote, in response to his cousin's contention, Sherman withdrew millions of dollars in financial assistance he had been providing them. Their statement of claim contended he had offered the financial assistance in the first place in order to make the cousins dependent on him and to keep them from learning about their rights to the business, end quote. It's like the Canadian version of Succession. And like the Roy family, the Shermans were constantly embroiled in multiple legal battles. According to a piece from Maclean's in 2018, quote, Sherman, on his own and through his companies, was the country's most active litigant, a man who used the courts as readily as others used the subway. Even as politicians paid tribute to him after his death, his company was locked in legal battles with their governments on multiple fronts, end quote. And there's also this from the same article, Quote, "It's no secret the drug executive had amassed a long list of enemies in his 50-year career. A renowned risk-taker, disruptor, and pit bull professionally, Sherman was a polarizing figure, regarded as a softy with a heart of gold by those in his proximity, and loathed by those who claimed they were outfoxed or betrayed by him." The late physician and pharmaceutical entrepreneur Morton Sherman, who did battle with Sherman, called him, quote, "the only person I have ever met with no redeeming features whatsoever," end quote. I'm gonna be honest, it feels a little icky to say something like that about a man who was murdered alongside his wife. But when someone is murdered, a long list of enemies and their complaints becomes an important document. And even some of Barry's friendships were tainted by money. Take, for example, Barry's longtime friend Frank D'Angelo, who was also a beneficiary of Barry's noted charitable nature. Between 2003 and 2017, Barry had helped finance D'Angelo's somewhat nebulous business ventures, which it seems had something to do with movie making and booze. Like I said, nebulous. In those 14 years, Barry had issued D'Angelo low-interest loans to the tune of over $268 million plus interest. According to a piece in Bloomberg from 2023, Barry wrote D'Angelo an email in the fall of 2017, a couple of weeks before the murders, that read, in part, quote, "Losses of $500,000 per month appear to be endless, despite endless assurances that we are now doing well. Where is it all going?" End quote. D'Angelo responded by assuring Barry that their movie Sicilian Vampire was the #1 movie on Mexican TV. I can't imagine that was tremendously reassuring, but also, could you imagine being Sicilian and someone turns you into a vampire and then they're like, "Oh yeah, watch out for garlic now, it'll kill you." I would just run out into the sunshine at the first opportunity. Anyway, Barry wasn't convinced, and he shot back a reminder that he'd been loaning D'Angelo roughly $12 million a year for 14 years and would be cutting off the money teat at the end of the year. Not in those exact words, though, probably. But investing in B movies wasn't the only weird financial choice Barry made. In 1988, his former stockbroker, Harvey Rubenstein, called him from jail, asking him to bail him out. Rubenstein was facing charges in both Canada and the States for defrauding clients out of millions of dollars. Surely, then, Rubenstein hadn't defrauded Barry out of millions, right? Wrong. Barry was indeed one of Rubenstein's victims. In fact, Barry had filed his own suit against Rubenstein for defrauding him of millions. But Rubenstein called Barry from prison pleading with him to post the $100,000 bail because, he said, he could better focus on recouping the funds he'd stolen and lost from outside prison. And just in case that went by a little quickly, he robbed Barry of millions of dollars and then called him to bail him out so that he could come up with a way to get the money back. Surely then Barry said no, right? Wrong. He loaned him half the amount because, according to McLean's, he later swore in a deposition, quote, "I couldn't see any benefit from my viewpoint of having him languish in jail," end quote. And then, according to McLean's, quote, "Sherman spent the next 4 years fighting in U.S. court to eventually recoup what, for him, was essentially pocket change," end quote. And as much as he was willing to lend a helping million or two or 200, Barry did expect to be paid back. That is, after all, how loans work. Barry's son Jonathan and his business partner Adam Paulin had borrowed upwards of $125 million for their self-storage business. About 2 weeks before the murder, Barry emailed the pair saying he needed to be repaid about half that amount, somewhere between $50 and $60 million. He suggested they mortgage properties, if necessary. And while I'm sure it came as quite a ball-shrinking shock to Jonathan and Adam to learn they were expected to quickly come up with that kind of capital, Barry also added this in the same email, quote, I am certain that we will be able to advance further substantial funds to you, if wanted, for further investments beginning in 2019. End quote. I'm just going to stick my nose in for one moment, as that is, in fact, my job, and say, is it just me, or should conversations about these kinds of amounts of money be done in person? I find it hard enough to ask someone to pay me back $20 via text or email. I get that you need a paper trail. I just hope these conversations also happen face to face. Tone matters, you know? Despite the very real list of people who may have held grudges against Barry, and by extension, I suppose, his wife, police initially ruled the deaths a murder-suicide, in part because the house did not appear to have been robbed, and there was $7,500 left in Honey's wallet. I'm not even going to imagine what it's like to just be walking around with that kind of money. How do you even fit that much money in a wallet? My wallet literally won't clasp shut with more than a 20 stuffed in it. Anyway. So police were like, clearly this is a murder-suicide. Case solved. Good job, boys. But the Sherman children were like, come again, eh? There was no way, they said, that this was a murder-suicide. There was absolutely zero indication of any kind of issues in their marriage that would have led any right-minded person to that conclusion. But because they already decided it was a murder-suicide, police hadn't bothered to collect any security camera footage from the neighbors or anywhere the Shermans were known to have been immediately prior to them returning home, ostensibly on the night of December 13th. They wouldn't get that footage for a few days, and then, bafflingly, they wouldn't review it for months. And for some reason, it took them even longer, more than a month, to collect footage from the mall Honey had been shopping and withdrawn the money from the ATM at on the 13th, by which point only the bank's footage was still intact. The footage didn't show anything suspicious, but surely if she had been followed at the mall, they likely wouldn't have stood behind her at the ATM. And as for any prints or DNA, police didn't even begin to collect DNA and fingerprints from individuals known to have been in the home until 9 months into the investigation. They also didn't bother to collect security footage from the airport, where it's certainly possible someone who committed a double murder of 2 prominent citizens might have hightailed it to afterward to skip the country and evade capture. Later, when asked under cross-examination about why they didn't collect airport footage, according to the Toronto Star, Detective Constable Dennis Yim stated, quote, "Why would we do that? The person could have changed their appearance," end quote. He also stated he did not know how long the airport kept security footage. Okay, that's not a great look, Detective Constable. By the time they did get around to getting the neighbor's footage and actually looking at it, which was a full 6 months after the murders, they discovered a person they named the Walking Man, who, according to the Toronto Star, quote, was picked up on several home security cameras walking along sidewalks and roads. There are a few security cameras around the Old Colony Road neighborhood, but police determined the man approached the Sherman home, disappeared near the home, no cameras pick him up entering the home if he did enter the home, spent a suspicious amount of time near the Sherman home, and then left the same way he arrived, traveling east toward Leslie Street, end quote. Remarkably, the Shermans themselves did not have security cameras, to which I say, huzzah! Why everyone feels the need to surveil everyone else all the time is beyond me. I mean, I get it. We're told we live in a dangerous world where everyone wants our stuff. But let's be real. For most of us, no one is coveting our mid-range furniture. Also, while we're on the subject, if America's Funniest Home Videos is to be believed, why are people setting up security cameras in their own living rooms? I appreciate the footage of people crashing through their own glass coffee tables as much as the next guy, but why are you all surveilling your own living rooms? It's giving Big Brother vibes for sure. I recognize, of course, that perhaps if the Shermans did have security cameras, they'd still be alive today. Obviously, a murderer is less likely to attack people in a home outfitted with cameras. And if ever there was someone who maybe should have had security cameras around their house, it's the incredibly wealthy couple with a list of people who owed them millions of dollars. I just want to hold on to the illusion that people are mostly good for as long as I possibly can. At the very least, I want to know I can trip and fall in front of my neighbor's home without ending up a finalist on AFV. You know what I mean? We all used to be able to do embarrassing stuff in public and have the memory of it only live in the heads of those who were actually present for it. Now, we become memes. Where was I? Oh yeah, the poorly handled investigation into the murder of 2 innocent people. No one was able to identify the walking man, and of course, if he did skip town, any evidence of that was long gone because of Detective Constable Yim's stellar police work. The Sherman children were dissatisfied enough with the police's handling of the murders that they paid for their own investigation, the autopsy of which determined that the ligature marks around Barry and Honey's necks did not match the belts they were found bound to the pool handrails with, something the first autopsy missed. That autopsy also discovered ligature marks around their wrists, which the first autopsy also missed. 6 weeks after the murders, after insistent prodding by the Shermans' children, armed with the new autopsy discoveries, police changed their theory from murder-suicide to the far more common-sense double homicide, adding that it was likely a professional hit, given how clean and orderly the crime scene was and how few clues were left behind. Apparently, Jonathan had given the police a list of names of people he thought might have been holding grudges against their father, though that list was never made public. And of course, Jonathan himself, some believe, had reason to hold a grudge against his father. Don't forget, Barry had asked Jonathan and his business partner to pay back part of what they owed him to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. It feels imperative to state up front that police do not consider Jonathan a suspect in Barry and Honey's murders. As I've said before, it feels dicey telling a modern-day story with survivors and suspects who are still alive. I'm sure anytime anything comes out in the media about their parents' murder, the Sherman children have to brace themselves for all kinds of potential slander, mischaracterization, and facts they might not agree with. It can't be pleasant and probably feels like salt in an open wound. Alexandra Sherman, the couple's third oldest, whom Barry and Honey were planning on moving closer to, cut off ties with her older brother Jonathan about 2 years after the murders. And while he begged her to tell him why, and she refused, he apparently later found out, according to the piece in Bloomberg, from 4 people close to her that she had come to believe he was involved in the murders somehow. Turns out that in addition to the $50 to $60 million his father was asking him to pay back, there may have been some tension between Jonathan and his parents because of his sexuality. Honey, in particular, was said to be uncomfortable that her son was gay and could be abrasive about it. However, despite whatever personal feelings she may have had, on the day of the murders, she and Barry, or at least Barry, had agreed to pay for the cost of surrogacy so Jonathan and his husband could have a child. According to Bloomberg, some relatives claimed the Shermans had both expressed frustration over their children's lack of work ethic. That's the thing about those silver spoons. Once they're in your kids' mouths, it's hard to get them to learn where to get their own spoons when the time comes. The parents were also disappointed that none of their children wanted to work at Apotex. Show me an uncomplicated parent-child relationship, and I'll show you the dark underbelly you can't see. Add potentially billions of dollars into the mix, and you've got a pretty tangled mess. If Barry was concerned about his son's relationship with money, it didn't prevent him from making Jonathan one of the 4 trustees of the estate and business. Together with Apotex executive Jack Kay, son-in-law Brad Krajek, and money manager Alex Glassenberg, the 4 were left in control of Apotex. In 2018, according to Bloomberg, Jonathan announced that he and his sisters had made the determination to sell Apotex as quickly as possible, hopefully in 9 to 18 months to maximize profit. The announcement, which apparently came as a surprise, or at the very least without the blessing of at least one of the other trustees, Jack Kay, led to tensions between Jack Kay and Jonathan. When Kay moved into Barry's old office, it rubbed Jonathan the wrong way, and a year after the murders, he fired Kay from Apotex. But Jonathan's behavior after his parents' death doesn't necessarily mean he had anything to do with their murders. It could just mean that he learned from his father how to be a ruthless business person and take advantage of someone's death in order to increase one's own wealth. Like father, like son? And then there was Barry's cousin Carrie, who'd lost that lawsuit against Barry and then was ordered to pay Barry's legal fees just 1 week before the murders. Not only that, but Carrie was incredibly bitter about the way his life had turned out because, he said, Barry had essentially stolen his family wealth out from under him and his brothers. Carrie was very vocal about his ire toward Barry. He certainly didn't do himself any favors by telling the CBC program The Fifth Estate just weeks after the murders, quote, "He wasn't this loving, kind person giving money away, pillar of the Jewish community. He cared about one thing, money, making lots of it and not caring who he destroyed, who he stepped on, or who he fucked over, like me and my brothers," end quote. I don't know who this guy's lawyer was, but they probably had a heart attack when later in the same segment, Carrie said this, quote, "The way I was going to do it wouldn't have been belts. It was going to be in the Apotex parking lot. That was my vision always, that he'd come out of the building at Apotex and I'd be hiding behind a car and I would just decapitate him. I wanted to roll his head down the parking lot and I'd just sit there waiting for the police," end quote. Dude. But not to worry. Despite his hatred for and vivid fantasies of decapitating his uncle, Carrie assured viewers that he had nothing to do with his uncle and aunt's murder. And he told Maclean's, quote, "I have every reason to hate this man, but I had nothing to do with their demise," end quote. Oh, well that clears that up. Thanks. Carrie also insisted that in the 90s, Barry tried to enlist him in killing Honey, saying their marriage was miserable. He told a reporter he'd replied, quote, "Fuck, Barry's asking me to arrange a fucking whack job on his wife," end quote. Yet despite his shock and horror, he said he did actually start looking into it before changing his mind. Okay. The Sherman children denied Carrie's claims, though I suppose it's possible they wouldn't have been privy to a request like this. That said, I have my own suspicions that Barry asked his cousin to put a hit out on his wife. Even though Carrie was running all over Canada telling anyone who would listen that he did have a murderous hatred toward Barry, and had thought out how he would indeed act on that murderous hatred, police ruled him out as a suspect. There was also quite a bit of corporate intrigue surrounding Barry's company Apotex. Unsurprisingly, like Barry himself, the company was embroiled in several lawsuits, including one involving a former employee they accused of stealing millions of dollars worth of formulations so he could start his own company in his native Pakistan. 5 months before the murders, the U.S. division of Israel's Teva Pharmaceuticals Limited alleged that one of their employees had a romantic relationship with one of Apotex's employees and gave him proprietary information. Both Apotex and the employee alleged to have received the information denied the claims, but the employee resigned 6 weeks after the murders, which I guess some people find suspicious. And according to Maclean's, just 6 weeks before the murders, Apotex was named in a lawsuit and was accused of price fixing in America by colluding with 2 other pharmaceutical companies to hide the price of an arthritis drug. And of course, when there are no definitive answers, the tinfoil hat crowd likes to seep in and fill in the gaps. According to a piece from the CBC from 2023, quote, "The conspiracies run deep, but there was one constant. Every theory involved money, directly or indirectly. There was a belief that someone in Big Pharma finally had enough of Barry's lawsuits, or a shady deal within the generic drug world pushed the wrong person too far. Then there are those that hinted at the Russian mob over a supply of fentanyl, or even that Barry had predicted a worldwide pandemic and that he was killed for his supply of hydroxychloroquine, a medicine used to treat autoimmune diseases like arthritis and lupus that during the pandemic was misguidedly promoted as a cure for COVID-19, end quote. And at the risk of sounding like a real nerd, the phrase worldwide pandemic is redundant, and also, anyone paying even the smallest bit of attention could have told you a pandemic was bound to come. Lots of people were trying to raise the alarm long before 2020. Spoiler alert, there are more pandemics to come. Stock up on that hydroxychloroquine, folks. LOL, just kidding. That shit doesn't treat the plague. Anyway, after 7 years, all we really know is that someone killed Barry and Honey Sherman. It's hard to believe that no one is any closer to solving the double murder of one of Canada's most prominent power couples. Either the killer was extraordinarily lucky or very, very good at their job. Either police were especially inept or someone high up was angry enough at the Shermans that they pulled some strings. The truth is, people are murdered all the time. And I'm no homicide statistician, but I'd wager a good many of those murders go unsolved. But something hits different when the victims are incredibly wealthy and well-known. There's something extra unsettling about knowing that all the money in the world isn't enough to save you. Indeed, if stories like Succession and many a Shakespeare tragedy are to be believed, not to mention this very real modern-day tragedy, money may very well be your undoing. Next time on Strange and Unexplained. There is something that stalks the good folks from the great state of New Jersey. Something more terrifying than Snooki. Something more diabolical than Chris Christie. Beware the Jersey Devil. Strange and Unexplained is a production of Three Goose Entertainment with help from Grab Bag Collab. This episode was written by me, Daisy Egan, with research by the Strange Research Squad. Editing help from Amber Hunt, and sound engineering and mixing by Henry Lavoie. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month, you'll get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8, you get those, plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary owned profit share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows, maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. Why, there's so much going on over at Grab Bag, you'd wondered if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, or head over to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick review and 5 stars, subscribe and download and tell a friend. If you don't like the show, the name of the podcast is The Rubin Report. Stay strange.